What happens when a quiet black teen turns a rigged school performance into a jaw-dropping act of defiance? Hit play. This isn't just music. It's a revolution in real time. At Monroe High School, in a small town in Georgia, 13-year-old Malik Johnson, a black boy, sat quietly at the back of the music classroom, trying to shrink into the worn-out gray plastic chair that had long faded with age. Every time his fingers unconsciously tapped a rhythm on the desk, it was his heart speaking truths that words couldn't express. Small, silent sounds, yet carrying an entire world of turmoil inside. Malik knew the rules of the game here all too well. Not the kind written in the student handbook, but the kind every black kid learns early, that no matter how good you are, if you're different, you're already a step behind. And to the music teacher, Mrs. Evelyn Hart, a stern white woman in her late 50s with tightly pinned platinum hair and always crisp dresses, that truth wasn't just implied. It was explicit. She never said Malik's name without some edge to it. Always a sigh, or a remark laced with sarcasm like a blade wrapped in ribbon. She never scolded him outright, but every glance, every interruption, cut deeper than any raised voice ever could. While the white students were praised for trying, Malik was met with criticism even when he got things right. This wasn't just a music class. It was a battlefield. And Malik, though young, had learned to stay silent. But that didn't mean he had accepted defeat. That day, the air in the classroom felt heavier than usual. Mrs. Hart stood in front of the whiteboard, marker in hand, her voice steady but cold, like shattered glass. Today we're going to talk about Mozart, Beethoven, and what we call true art, she said, her gaze sweeping the room like a hawk searching for prey. Then, as if it had all been rehearsed, her eyes landed on Malik. Of course! She paused, a thin, papery smile curling at her lips. Not everyone is capable of understanding this kind of music, especially if you grew up in, where was it, South Atlanta? A few students chuckled, half genuine, half awkward laughs, but enough to make Malik's ears burn. He clenched his hands on his lap, palms sweating. Still, he said nothing. He just stared at the piano, standing quietly in the corner, like an old friend who was listening. Malik, Mrs. Hart called, her voice syrupy sweet, but ice cold. I'm sure you know the name of a famous rap song, right? But tell me this, what notes make up a major third? The classroom held its breath. Malik lifted his head, eyes steady and unblinking, voice clear and calm. Depends on the key, but in C major it's C and E. For a brief moment, Mrs. Hart's smile faltered, like a candle snuffed out by an unexpected breeze. And Malik knew he had just taken his first step out of the shadows she had built around him. A quiet, "Oh," came from a desk in the back. Not mockery, but the sound of someone's assumptions cracking. Mrs. Hart blinked once, the smile returning to her lips, this time forced and brittle. "Oh, so you have memorized a few things," she said, clapping her hands lightly together as if amused by an unexpected little circus act. "Impressive. I suppose even a broken clock is right twice a day, isn't it?" A few students laughed, more weaklier than before. Some winced. Malik didn't laugh. He wasn't angry, either. He simply tilted his head and looked at her quietly, as if watching a tragic play where the lead actress didn't realize the audience had grown tired of the same old performance. "Well then," Mrs. Hart said, like she just had a brilliant idea, "I heard your grandfather used to play jazz?" "How? Charming. In that case, Malik, tomorrow you'll perform a piece for the class. Let's see how valuable your instincts really are." The class let out a collective murmur. Whether out of excitement or recognition of an obvious setup wasn't clear. A few white students exchanged raised eyebrow looks, like they were waiting for the next act in a show. Some of the black students looked down, silent, as if witnessing someone being offered up as a joke and feeling powerless to stop it. Malik remained seated, quiet. Mrs. Hart didn't need to spell it out. Everyone understood. This wasn't an invitation to perform. It was a test rigged from the start. And what she didn't know was that she had just unknowingly signed up to be the one evaluated in the performance to come. That night, in a small house on the edge of Monroe, the wind howled through the old window panes like it was whispering truths no one dared speak. Malik sat at the worn Yamaha piano his grandfather had left behind, The paint chipped, the D key sticking slightly every time it was pressed. He didn't play, just rested his hands on the keys, silent. The kitchen light spilled warm yellow into the living room, where his mother, Denise Johnson, leaned in the doorway, arms crossed, her face half in shadow and half in light, like a living portrait. You know what she's trying to do, right? Her voice rang out, not harsh, not soft, just honest and unvarnished. Malik nodded, eyes still on the piano. She wants me to mess up, wants the class to laugh. She thinks I'll be the joke. His mother stepped in, her slippers making soft, offbeat sounds against the wooden floor, like the music of a life slightly out of rhythm. So, what are you going to do? Stand there like a statue, or wake that piano soul up? Malik let out a small laugh, the first since he'd left class. I don't know, he whispered. I'm not sure I want to play for them. Why should I perform just to prove myself to them? Denise sat down beside her son, her eyes soft with tenderness and a spark of mischief. Because this isn't their performance, she said. It's yours. They're not your audience, they're your witnesses. She placed a hand on Malik's back, gently rubbing it. Your grandfather used to say, music isn't about getting applause. It's how we prove we exist, even when the world pretends not to see us. You don't need to prove you're talented. You need to show them you won't break. Malik was silent. Then he lifted his head, eyes lighting up like sunlight piercing through heavy clouds. Then tomorrow I'll play. And this time, the sound of the piano rang out, not as the start of a practice session, but as a declaration. The storm was coming. That night, Malik's small house became a world of its own, where only he, the piano, and the music existed, growing steadily like a fire in his chest. The TV sounds from a neighbor's apartment leaked through the thin wall, dogs barked in the backyard, and trucks hummed along the highway a few miles away, but all of it was drowned beneath the music pouring from the hands of a 13-year-old boy preparing for battle. Malik didn't play like a kid learning the piano. He played like someone telling a story Mrs. Hart wouldn't be able to control, interrupt, or twist to fit her version. He started with the jazz chords his grandfather once taught him, music that was both free and disciplined, like a river that knew exactly where it wanted to go. Then he blended in classical notes, flourishes, arpeggios he'd learned from YouTube, from sleepless nights spent listening to Chopin and Mozart through cheap headphones. With every keystroke, Malik imagined he was striking down every word Mrs. Hart had ever said, and shattering them with music that rang with pride. All right. His mother called from the kitchen, handing him a peanut butter and banana sandwich, her go-to energy booster before every exam. Practice all you want, but don't forget to eat. You've still got to make that woman choke on every note you play. Malik laughed, taking the sandwich in one hand, while his other kept playing spontaneous chords. Tomorrow I'm not performing, he said. I'm proving. And all night long he played, not to memorize, but to carve every melody into his blood and bones. Tomorrow morning, he wouldn't walk into that classroom as Mrs. Hart's student, but as an artist of his own making. The next morning, the air in the music classroom was eerily silent. No whispers, no giggles, just stillness. Every pair of eyes was fixed on the old upright piano in the corner of the room, its paint chipped, a few keys marked with tiny cracks like time-worn scars. Malik walked in, backpack slung over one shoulder, wearing an expression so calm it made a few students glance back at him. Puzzled, there was no sign of fear, no trace of a kid about to become the punchline. He walked to the piano, set his backpack down, and sat at the bench like he belonged there all along. Mrs. Hart stood by the whiteboard, arms crossed, wearing a thin smile, the kind that barely clung to her lips like a stamp on an unsealed envelope. "We're waiting, Malik," she said, a hint of smugness in her tone. Malik didn't answer. He placed his hands on the keys and closed his eyes. 1 second, 2. Then the first note rang out, deep, full of weight. The class sat still. He began with a classic jazz progression, a slow, rich bass line pulsing like a heartbeat. Then, suddenly, it shifted into a sharp, crystalline arpeggio that rang out like glass bells tumbling across a tile floor. His fingers moved across the keys like they were speaking in a language only he knew, one that didn't need translation. Mrs. Hart tilted her head slightly, her brows pulling together. Malik kept going, the rhythm rising, faster, more urgent, then suddenly falling into a quiet, aching chord that seemed to say, "I'm here. I was never gone." This was no longer a class presentation. It was a concert, and for the first time all school year, no one laughed. No one spoke. There was only the music, and an unspoken recognition settling over the room. When Malik struck the final note, a low, resonant chord that lingered like a deep breath after a storm, the room remained silent. No applause, no jokes, just a heavy hush, like the dust that had settled on that old piano now shaken loose by something alive, like a dragon awakened. Malik stayed still, hands resting on the keys, his breathing steady, eyes fixed on the piano, as if the entire universe had just passed through his fingertips. He didn't look at anyone. He didn't have to. He knew he had just done something that couldn't be ignored. A single clap rang out, clear, certain, from somewhere in the middle of the class. Then another, and suddenly, the room erupted in applause, sharp and joyous, like everyone had just woken from a long sleep to witness something miraculous. Everyone except Mrs. Hart. She remained frozen by the whiteboard, chin tilted, eyes sharp as razor blades, discomfort etched across her face. Her fingers gripped her lesson binder like she meant to crush it into dust. "Not bad," she said finally, her voice sweet as syrup but laced with a bite of vinegar. "Still, this is a classical class. I'm not sure you really understand proper technique." The applause faded, and a few students exchanged glances, the discomfort now unmistakable. Malik turned around, rising from the piano bench. He looked directly at her, eyes steady, voice calm but unwavering. "You don't want to admit you were wrong. You thought I would fail, didn't you? Because I'm the black kid from the poor neighborhood." The room went still. Someone gasped. A white girl near the front whispered, "He's not wrong." Mrs. Hart clenched her fists, her lips pressed into a thin line as if Malik's words had been needles pricking the pride she'd built over a lifetime of teaching. "I'm the teacher here," she snapped. "And if I say you're not good enough, then you're not good enough." Malik took a step forward, shoulders square like a drawn bowstring. "You can teach music, but you don't get to define who I am." And this time, when the applause broke out again, it wasn't just for the music. It thundered through the classroom, louder, deeper. Not applause out of being impressed, but the kind given when someone just did something right in a world that too often stays silent. Mrs. Hart remained standing by the whiteboard, face frozen like a stone wall, but she was no longer the center of the room. All attention had shifted away from the board that still read Beethoven and Mozart, and now focused solely on the 13-year-old boy who had just turned a battered old piano into his own stage. Malik said nothing more. He didn't have to. Every look from his classmates, every quiet nod, every eye that no longer looked past him, they were answers louder than any words he could have spoken. Mrs. Hart cleared her throat, as if trying to reel the class back in. "All right, let's get back to the lesson." But no one moved. Near the window, Zach, the white student who used to mock Malik's voice during class discussions, suddenly spoke up. "You know what? I've never seen anyone play like that, and I've watched a live stream of this jazz guy in New York." The whole class burst out laughing, not at Malik. This time, the laughter was for the truth that had finally been said aloud. After class, the usually crowded hallway seemed to part before Malik like a wide avenue. People didn't look through him anymore. A red-haired girl named Kaylee tapped him on the shoulder. "Today, you were like straight out of a movie," she said. "For real." Even Marcus, the quiet black student who usually sat silently in the corner, stepped up and gave Malik a light punch on the shoulder. "That was strong, man. No one's ever talked to her like that." Malik just gave a small smile, slinging his backpack over one shoulder. "She's not the first to underestimate me, and she won't be the last." And for the first time, he walked out of the classroom not as a student, but as a wave that had just shattered an old wall everyone thought couldn't be moved. That afternoon, the skies over Monroe turned gray, clouds drifting slowly as if gathering up the emotions of the morning, ready to fall as a gentle rain. Malik sat alone at the far end of the schoolyard, beneath the old concrete awning where kids usually hung out after class. His hands still tingled from performance, But inside, there was a strange stillness, not sadness, not fear, but the quiet feeling of standing at the edge of something that had already begun to change. He hadn't expected his playing to make such an impact. Malik had simply done the one thing he believed was right. But in doing so, he had torn off a mask Mrs. Hart had worn for years, a mask everyone saw, but no one had dared to call out. He thought of his mother's words. Music is your voice when the world tries to silence you. And today, for the first time, that voice had been heard, without interruption. Maybe the greatest lesson he learned wasn't how to play a classic jazz piece, or how to properly structure a major third. It was how to stand tall without raising his voice, how to push back without ever shouting. Sometimes, the most powerful silence is when your voice arrives at the right moment and in the right way. In the distance, Malik saw Mrs. Hart step out of the main building, still clutching her lesson binder like a shield that no longer worked. Her eyes passed over him, just a flicker, then turned away. No apology, no glance of regret. But Malik didn't need it anymore. He no longer needed validation from someone who had denied his worth. Because today, Malik had rewritten his own definition, through music, through courage, and through a silence that could no longer be ignored. The next morning, when Malik walked into the music classroom, he wasn't a shadow in the back anymore. He wasn't the kid who played cool jazz yesterday. He was simply Malik Johnson, the one who stepped onto a stage no one invited him to, and made it his own. No teasing, no skeptical looks, just a few quiet nods, a couple of small smiles, and a feeling that didn't need words. Respect. Mrs. Hart said nothing as he entered. She stood at her desk, flipping through her binder, her gaze no longer sharp like the day before. Maybe she realized something. Maybe not. But Malik knew. He didn't need her to say it. He didn't need an apology. He didn't need a speech praising his talent. Because what he did went far beyond music. He showed the whole class and himself that true worth isn't measured by how others see you, but by how you see yourself. And sometimes all it takes is one moment of standing up, one refusal to back down, to change everything. That afternoon, in the hallway between the classroom wing and the library, Malik ran into Marcus, the quiet black kid who'd always avoided conflict. Marcus stepped up, a small smile breaking through the usually closed-off expression on his face. "I think, because of you, I might sign up to play guitar at the spring concert," he said, his voice carrying a shy but steady determination. Malik smiled. "Then play. Don't let anyone else decide what music is real." And with every step he took down that hallway, the sound of the piano from the day before still echoed, not just in the classroom, but in the hearts of those who had witnessed it. Thank you for following the emotional journey of Malik Johnson, from silence to being heard. If this story touched something in your heart, don't forget to subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. The small but powerful, honest, and inspiring pieces of life we share. See you next time on the next chapter of Storytelling.